I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Think about a time when you were right in the middle of a deeply chaotic, confusing, or I don't know, maybe just completely overwhelming situation.
Right.
Your heart is racing, your mind is going a mile a minute, and you are dedicating every single ounce of your energy just to processing what is happening in that exact moment.
Just trying to survive it, really.
Exactly. And right then, right at the peak of that chaos, someone steps in, taps you on the shoulder, and demands a perfectly logical, cohesive explanation for what is going on. They look at you and just ask, why?
Yeah, it's a jarring image. But it happens constantly.
It totally does.
And it perfectly sets the stage for our mission today on this deep dive. We are looking at a brief but just highly concentrated piece of writing by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks. It's titled WH Questions and the Cost of Compression.
And there's a subtitle too, right?
Yes, why is often the cruelest question.
Wow. The cruelest question. Okay, let's unpack this because, I mean, my initial reaction to that title was definitely a bit of surprise.
I think most people's would be.
Right, because we are generally taught from, childhood that asking why is a good thing. It shows you're paying attention. It shows you care.
What's fascinating here is the core premise the author is laying out, which, challenges that exact assumption. As a society, we do treat why as this universal sign of innocent curiosity.
Yeah.
But for individuals who are unsupported or in a vulnerable state, that simple why doesn't register as curiosity at all. It functions as a cross-examination.
A cross-examination, that's a heavy word.
It is. Because it places an immediate, really heavy cognitive demand on someone who might, frankly, barely be keeping their head above water.
The author actually captures that feeling with a very vivid phrase. They talk about the immense pressure put on people to, and I'm quoting here, narrate the flood whilst still inside it.
Such a powerful image.
It really is. It makes me think of being asked to draw an accurate, highly detailed, top-down map of a complex maze. But you're currently sprinting through that very maze.
Right, just trying to find the exit.
Exactly. Just trying to survive. You physically cannot give a bird's eye view when you are down in the mud surrounded by walls.
That maze analogy hits the nail on the head regarding the mechanics of what the brain is actually trying to do there. And it ties directly into the title's concept of the cost of compression.
Which I definitely want to dig into. What is that cost?
Well, to understand it, we have to look at how human experience works versus how language works. Human experience, especially, complex emotions or sudden trauma, or even the unfolding of one's identity, it's vast.
Yeah.
It is sensory, it is messy, and it is entirely nonlinear. The brain is processing sights, sounds, feelings, and threats all at once in this massive web.
Right, it's a flood. Like the quote says, the water is coming from everywhere.
Precisely. But language is linear.
Oh, I see.
To answer a why question, you have to use language. You have to take that vast, nonlinear web of experience and force it through the really narrow funnel of vocabulary and grammar.
You need a subject, a verb, an object.
Exactly. You need cause and effect. So when someone asks why, they're demanding that you take the flood and compress it into a neat, easily digestible soundbite, one that makes logical sense to them.
Wow. So the cost of that compression
is the nuance, the reality, and often the truth of your actual lived experience.
Because to make it make sense to someone standing on dry land, you essentially have to leave out 90% of what it actually feels like to be drowning.
That's exactly it.
It's like trying to take a massive, ultra-high definition video file and compress it down so small that it fits into an old SMS text message.
Right. The quality gets completely ruined.
You lose the texture. The final image is just pixelated and distorted, and that's if you can even send it at all.
And we have to remember that cognitive demand actively interrupts the processing of the event itself. When you are inside the flood, your brain's limbic system, primarily the amygdala, is highly active.
Dealing with the raw emotions and survival stuff.
Yes. It is dealing with emotion, survival, sensory input. But forming a cohesive narrative about why something is happening, that requires the prefrontal cortex.
The logic center.
The logical reasoning part of the brain, yeah. And language centers like Broca's area.
So you are basically asking the brain to, switch gears completely while it's still trying to handle an active emergency.
Exactly. You are asking someone to do high-level executive functioning and retrospective analysis while they are still in a state of immediate experiential processing.
Which is insane when you think about it.
It is. And that demand for post hoc narration, this societal expectation that we must always be able to look back and cleanly narrate our actions with perfect causality, It creates a massive psychological burden.
I really want you listening right now to consider how often you demand this kind of compression. And not just from your friends or family, but from yourself.
We do it constantly.
We really do. How often do you sit there expecting a clean, bullet-pointed summary of a reality that is fundamentally messy and, frankly, still unfolding?
We expect instant results too. Which brings us to a crucial friction point in how we communicate. Because human beings are not always able to provide that compressed file on demand.
Right. Which leads to what the author calls delayed access. Basically, if compressing the flood is neurologically and emotionally impossible in the moment, a person is inevitably going to stumble when asked to explain themselves.
Yes, there will be a delay.
But wait, I have to push back here for a second because this rubs right up against some very deep societal conditioning.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if I ask someone a simple why question, like why they missed a deadline or why they reacted a certain way and they stammer or blank out or hesitate, my gut instinct says they are making up an excuse.
That's how we're raised.
Right. We are taught from day one that hesitation equals guilt. So how is giving someone a pass on answering why not just giving them a shield to avoid accountability?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that very instinct, the assumption that hesitation equals guilt, is the exact metric Dr. Hoerricks is trying to dismantle here.
Okay. How so?
The author makes a profound distinction. They argue that delayed access is overwhelmingly mistaken for dishonesty, when in reality, it is simply truth arriving later.
Truth arriving later. Wow, that completely reframes the silence.
It does, because it forces us to look at what is actually happening during that hesitation. The truth hasn't been fabricated to dodge accountability. It simply hasn't arrived at the verbal centers of the brain yet.
Because of that cognitive load we just talked about.
Exactly. Translating the limbic system's sensory chaos into the prefrontal cortex's logical language takes time. When a person hesitates, their brain is doing heavy lifting.
They're still in the flood.
They're sifting through the flood, trying to find the genuine data points, and figuring out how to build the bridge between what they feel and what they can actually say.
So when I misinterpret that hesitation as lying, I am essentially punishing them for taking the time to find the actual truth, rather than just, blurting out whatever easy, superficial answer will get me to back off.
That is the danger of prioritizing speed over accuracy in communication. Demanding an immediate answer doesn't speed up the arrival of the truth. It interrupts it.
It breaks the process.
It forces the person's brain to abandon the deep work of genuinely understanding the flood and instead pivot into a panic response. They just search for a safe, compressed narrative that will satisfy the interrogator.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about everyday arguments.
Oh, it happens in arguments all the time.
Right. Like, you ever get into an argument with a partner and they ask, why are you so upset about this tiny thing? And in the moment, you honestly don't know. You just know you were furious.
You feel the flood, but you don't have the words.
Exactly. And it might take you an hour of walking around the block to realize, oh, wait, it wasn't about the dishes. It was because I felt dismissed earlier today. The truth arrived later.
Because you weren't lying in the kitchen. Your brain just hadn't processed the file yet.
Yeah. And imagine if, in that kitchen, your partner relentlessly demanded the why right then and there. What happens to your body?
This is a vital part of the analysis, because the pressure to compress the flood doesn't just cause mental strain. It triggers a whole cascade of physiological responses.
The physical toll of communication. The author actually includes a gentle note early on in the piece, specifically asking the reader to pay attention to their own body.
Yes, tracking the somatic response.
They list out 4 distinct physical reactions that happen when we are faced with this coercive demand to explain ourselves. They mention tightening, floating away, going blank, or becoming suddenly over-alert.
And these aren't just poetic metaphors either. They are well-documented somatic responses to a perceived threat.
Even if the threat is just a question.
Yes. The nervous system doesn't necessarily distinguish between a physical predator and a psychological demand that it knows it cannot meet.
Let's break those down, because I think everyone listening has felt at least one of these. First, tightening. That physical clenching in your chest or your jaw, your shoulders, when someone corners you with a why question.
That is muscle armoring. Your sympathetic nervous system is kicking in, literally preparing your body to physically defend itself or absorb a blow.
Even though there's no actual physical blow coming.
Right. The environment feels coercive, and the body is bracing for impact anyway, even if the blow is just a barrage of interrogating questions.
That's intense. Then there is floating away. That feeling where you mentally leave the room, Like the person is still talking to you, demanding an explanation, but you feel untethered, like you're watching the conversation happen from the ceiling.
That points to dissociation. In terms of the nervous system, if the brain perceives a threat in this case, the demand to narrate the flood, but recognizes that it cannot fight the threat and cannot physically flee the room.
It just checks out.
It opts for a freeze or shutdown response.
It's a protective mechanism.
The brain is essentially pulling the plug on your conscious awareness to protect your psyche from the overwhelming cognitive and emotional overload.
Wow. And then there's going blank. I feel like this is the one that frustrates people the most. It's like someone took a wet sponge and wiped the chalkboard of your mind completely clean.
It's a horrible feeling.
You couldn't form a coherent sentence about why you did something if your life depended on it.
Going blank is deeply tied to how stress hormones interact with memory. When you feel cornered by a why, your body releases a massive surge of cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Yes. And high levels of cortisol can temporarily inhibit the function of the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain heavily involved in memory retrieval and processing context.
So you literally lose access to the file.
Exactly. It is a biological short circuit caused by stress.
Finally, becoming suddenly over alert, that spike of pure adrenaline, that hypervigilance where the hair on your arm stands up, and you feel like you have to watch every single word you say because you are suddenly in danger.
That's classic fight or flight hyperarousal.
Yeah.
Your brain is scanning for danger, viewing the person asking the question not as a curious friend, but as an active threat.
You know, what changes everything for me here is how the author frames these physical reactions. Normally, when I freeze up or my mind goes blank in a tense conversation, I feel ashamed.
Most of us do.
I feel like my brain broke, or I lost the argument, or I just failed the interaction. But the author says to the reader, and I'm quoting here, please treat that as information, not failure.
It completely flips the script on how we view our own communication skill.
It really does.
The author is explicitly giving you permission to listen to your nervous system. If your body is tightening or if your mind is going blank, it is sending you crucial data.
Telling you that the environment isn't safe.
Yes. It is telling you that the current environment is demanding a compression that you cannot safely provide. It is telling you the interaction has moved from curiosity to coercion.
Treat it as information. Letting your nervous system know that it does not owe anyone a clean narrative on command. That just shifts the power dynamic entirely.
And to ground this theory in reality, the author applies these mechanics directly to their own lived experience. We see how the demand for compression isn't just an interpersonal issue.
Right.
It functions at a societal level regarding identity.
Yeah, the author specifically points out that the world recently has not been subtle. They list an intense barrage of highly personal why questions that they constantly face regarding their public identity.
Very specific, invasive questions.
Questions like, why did you come out? Why are you trans and not cis? Why are you queer? Why do you write erotic pieces on Substack?
If we look at those specific questions through the analytical lens of the cost of compression, the mechanics become very clear. Society is approaching an individual and demanding that they take the vast, intricate, profoundly deep reality of human gender, sexuality, and artistic expression.
The flood.
Yes, the entire flood. And compress all of it into a neat, easily understandable causality. They are demanding a logical why for something that is fundamentally an experiential is.
They are asking them to draw the map of the maze while they are actively living their life in it.
And this illustrates the difference between genuine curiosity and a cross-examination. When a stranger demands to know why someone is a particular gender or sexual orientation, the question is rarely rooted in a desire to deeply understand the neurological and emotional complexities of that person's flood.
No, it's usually not.
The demand for a post hoc narration of one's fundamental existence forces the individual to justify their reality rather than simply live it. The burden of proof is placed entirely on the person experiencing the flood.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the natural follow-up is, okay, if we shouldn't be constantly asking why, if we shouldn't be forcing people to compress the flood or punishing them for delayed access, how are we supposed to communicate complex realities?
We need a new model.
Exactly. And the author offers a specific alternative framework. They write, these essays are meant to offer weather reports, not cross-examinations. So what does this all mean?
The framework of a weather report is incredibly useful for bypassing the cognitive overload we discussed earlier.
Think about a literal weather report. A weather report just gives you the current conditions, like it is raining outside, Or applying it to the text, I am queer, or I am trans.
Just stating the facts.
Right. Or even in a basic daily interaction, I am overwhelmed today. It is simply a statement of what is currently happening. When you hear a weather report that it's raining, you don't run outside, grab a raindrop, and demand that the sky explain its barometric pressure history to you.
That would be absurd.
You don't cross-examine the clouds about the specific causality of why they decided to form over your house today of all days. You simply accept the current conditions. You grab an umbrella, and you adjust your behavior accordingly.
Notice how a weather report completely removes the demand for causality. It does not require the person to engage their prefrontal cortex to construct a linear history of their emotional or physical state.
No forced compression.
Exactly. It doesn't require compression into a defensive soundbite. By offering weather reports, an individual can communicate their reality and get the support they need, like the umbrella, without taking on the crushing neurological burden of justifying why the rain exists to a world demanding tidy answers.
So what does this mean for us, the listeners, in our daily lives? It means we can drastically reduce the pressure on everyone's nervous systems simply by changing what we expect to hear.
Lowering the demand.
You don't have to explain the flood. You just have to be able to say the water is high today, and the people around you need to learn that that is enough information to pass you a life vest.
It requires a profound shift in how we listen. We have to train ourselves to receive data about a person's state without immediately reaching for the word why.
Which is hard. It's such a reflex.
It is a reflex, but we can't use it as a tool to dissect, challenge, or understand their reality on our own terms. We have to become comfortable with the reality of the rain without needing the history of the cloud.
Okay, let's bring all these threads together. We've covered a significant amount of ground regarding how the human brain processes communication under pressure.
We really have.
The core takeaway from Dr. Hoerricks' writing is that the question why is not inherently bad. But when it is weaponized as a tool to force someone to instantly compress a complex, ongoing reality into a logical soundbite.
When it forces someone to narrate the flood while they're still fighting the current.
Yes. When that happens, it ceases to be curiosity. It becomes coercion.
And we must recognize the physiological markers of that coercion. The tightening, the dissociation, the blank mind.
Like treat them as information.
Exactly. These are not communication failures. They are protective mechanisms of a nervous system under siege.
And crucially, we have to rethink our cultural obsession with immediate answers.
This raises an important question about how we judge truth and honesty. We need to internalize the concept of delayed access.
Truth arriving later.
A lack of an immediate, clean explanation is not a sign of deceit. It is the truth arriving later. Giving people the grace of time allows the truth to surface organically without the distortion of forced compression.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. The next time you find yourself aggressively leaning into the question why, and this could be during a disagreement with a colleague, a tense moment with a partner, or even just looking at yourself in the mirror demanding to know why you feel a certain way today.
Stop.
Stop. Take a breath and ask yourself, am I looking for a weather report to simply understand the current conditions? Or am I conducting a cross-examination? What would happen to your relationships and to your own nervous system if just for today you stopped demanding the map of the maze, accepted that it's raining, and let the truth arrive later?